Please open your Bibles with me to John chapter 16. I encourage you this morning to really follow along, and I think there'll be a real blessing. I think there'll be many different points of application that you can glean as we continue our study in the victory in Jesus. And John 16 and 33 is our starting point, where the Lord tells the apostles that He's overcome the world, and He set the example on how they can overcome the world and find victory in Him. These things I have spoken unto you, that you might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. And He set for us the example on how that you and I can overcome the world. There will be trials and tribulation. There will be setbacks and failures, but you can overcome in Christ. So that took us to Hebrews, and we've been looking at this list of average men and women. And I want to emphasize that these men and women listed in Hebrews are not listed there because they were in and of themselves something special, something a cut above the rest. They're listed there because they're average men and women that by faith did the impossible. And so that I try to make emphasis on that so that you can see that you by faith can do what you never dreamed you could do. You following the Lord by faith, obedient to His word, loyal to Him, can do what you never dreamed you could do. And not only are these average men and women in and of themselves, but they're flawed. Some of them deeply flawed, and we'll look at one today. Deeply flawed men and women. And yet listed here in Hebrews 11, given commendation here in Hebrews 11, forever immortalized as one who by faith did something spectacular. And yet, in the case of our study today, deeply, deeply flawed individual. So we watched them cross the Red Sea on dry ground. We watched Joshua lead them to march around Jericho in a God-given order. Saw the stronghold coming down. We watched Gideon and his 300 men defeat innumerable armies, put them to flight. And only 300 men plus Gideon, because God said, I don't want them to think they did it. I did it. Through their obedience, they won the victory. So that takes us to Hebrews 11 and verse 29 through 32. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians essaying to do or attempting to do were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were compassed about 7 days. By faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace. And so he wraps up that first section of Hebrews 11 where he's naming individuals and giving us very specific things that he's giving them commendation for. And then he starts another section, the writer starts another section where he says, and what shall I more say? Verse 32. For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak, and of Samson and Jephthah, of David and Samuel, and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword. Out of weakness were made strong. Remember that. Out of weakness were made strong. Waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens, or the strangers, the foreigners. And so I made a remark last week about verse 32 that it is 3 pairs of names not given in chronological order, and is seemingly the predominant one is issued first. And again, but not in chronological order. And last week, of course, we looked at Gideon. This week, we want to take the first name of the second set of names, Samson. I studied on and thought on, in verse 32, I studied on and thought on Barak, but I wasn't getting any traction with it through the week, and so I turned my attention to Samson and immediately started feeling like that's what the Lord would have us to do. So jump back with me to the book of Judges. The book of Judges, starting in chapter 13, and we want to look at Samson. Now, again, I made this comment last week that the writer of Hebrews expects us to have a decent enough working knowledge of our Bibles that these illustrations will bring a lot of vibrance to our mind. It'll bring, oh yeah, he did this, or oh yeah, she did that. And so it behooves us as a child of God to have a good working knowledge of our Bibles. But a quick recap of Samson. We want to start in chapter 13, and we'll get an overview of his life and early life. And starting in the first 5 verses of Judges chapter 13, the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord. And this is what's going on in the time of the Judges. The cycle of the children of Israel doing evil in the sight of the Lord putting them in the woodshed, the Lord teaching them a lesson, the Lord causing them to cry out unto Him. He sends a leader to deliver them, and then when that leader dies, they did evil in the sight of the Lord again. And it doesn't have to be that way, but that's what they were, and that's how they'd been acting, and that's what's starting off chapter 13 with. The children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. So right now they're in another captivity, another one of God's timeouts, another one of God's woodsheds, teaching them a lesson. And this time the Philistines are the ones that have taken them and taken over in their realm. And there was a certain man of Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and bare not. So these two couldn't have a child. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman and said unto her, Behold, now thou art barren, and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive and bear a son. Now therefore beware that, verse 4 again. Now therefore beware, I pray thee, drink not wine nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. For lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come on his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. And so their mortal enemy right now is the Philistines. And the ones that have rule over them is the Philistines. And the children of Israel were put there because they had again done evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord's going to raise up a deliverer. The Lord's going to get them once again, eventually, out of the hand of the Philistines. Now, their son is going to be Samson, and he's going to begin to start that process. He's going to begin the process of having them liberated from the domination of the Philistines. Now, we need to remember some of the escapades of Samson, if you will. Judges chapter 14, first 4 verses. And Samson went down to Timnath and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now, anybody that knows anything about Samson knows that women are his weakness. That's the easiest thing to trip up Samson, is with a beautiful woman. And here the mortal enemies are the Philistines. But he went down to Timnath. He saw a woman of the daughters of Timnath, of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and mother, said, I've seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now get her for me to wife. Then his father and his mother said unto him, Is there not, or never, a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all thy people, that thou should goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said unto his father, Get her for me, for she pleases me well. This is the whole of the matter. She pleases me. This is how he is operating. What pleases me? This is how he is operating. She's beautiful. I want her. Get her for me. Now here we see in the sovereignty of God and the responsibility of man, we see God sometimes working in a very positive way, orchestrating things in a very positive way. Sometimes we see him working in a very permissive way, allowing certain things to take place. And here we see that in verse 4. What his father and his mother did not know was that it was of the Lord. It was of the Lord that the Lord sought occasion against the Philistines. For at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. The Lord was allowing this. It wasn't the right thing for Samson to do, and he's going to pay for it. It's going to cost him. It's going to be a grief and a negative overall in his life, but the Lord's using all of that to accomplish exactly what he intends to accomplish. That doesn't absolve Samson of doing the wrong thing. And in the course of Samson's life, he does that a lot. Remember, Samson is one who is called upon by God. His parents were told he's going to start the delivering process from the Philistines. He is given to them for a purpose, a very specific purpose. He was to be set apart. Various things he was not to do as a Nazirite. And of course the famous not to have a razor to come to his head. There were things that he was not to do that most people could do. Most people did do. But he was not to. And he was to remain separated. And he's not in any way remaining separated. He's not in any way conducting his life in a way that makes him look like a child of God or names him among the children of God. But we'll come back to those things because all of those things are pictures that we want to draw from in his life. In chapter 15, more of the exploits of Samson. Chapter 15, verses 4 and 5. And he's retaliating against his father-in-law. It's a sordid affair, no pun intended. And he had, when he had set brands of fire and let them go into the standing, he's talking about foxes that he had rigged up in such a way, 300 foxes, that he would put firebrands between them, and then they would run through the fields and catch everything on fire. When he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines and burn up both the shocks and the standing corn, the vineyards and the olives. And the Philistines said, Who hath done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Temanite. And that's where he was. I meant to read verse 4. Verse 4 said, Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took firebrands and turned tail to tail and put the firebrand in the midst between the tails, and then set the firebrands on fire and let them go. That's what I meant to read. And just another one of Samson's famous acts. This one he does in retaliation to his father-in-law. And strikes a little bit of a blow to the Philistines economically and practically. And even striking a little bit of a blow to them psychologically. I mean, who is this that's done this to our fields, our livelihood? And then verse 15 is a very famous event that's recorded about Samson. He's in a situation, he's in a bit of a pickle. He finds a new jawbone of an ass and put forth in his hand and took it and slew 1,000 men therewith. 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. Superhuman ability and strength, God-given. I don't mean superhero. I mean God-given ability to do things that mortal men couldn't typically do. But remember, he was called upon, he was given to his parents for the purpose of beginning the process of having the Philistines freed, having the Israelites freed from the Philistines. And he's from time to time waging war in his own little way and for his own little reasons against the Philistines. And in chapter 16, he does something that's kind of famous. In the first 3 verses, the unfortunate thing is a woman is involved in chapter 13. A woman is involved in chapter 15. A woman is involved in chapter 16. This is his downfall. Then went Samson into Gaza and saw there an harlot, and went in unto her. And it was told the Gazites, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him in, and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city. They've got him now. He's been causing them trouble, and they've caught him with the prostitute, and they lay wait. And the end of verse 2, in the morning when it is day, we shall kill him. And Samson lay till midnight, and arose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 posts. Now these aren't little 3-foot entry doors that are in the side of the building. These are city gates, posts and all, that he carries them away. It says, the bars of the gate of the city and the 2 posts, and went away with them, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them up into the hill that is before Hebron. And so, demonstrating again ability that's not human, that's not altogether his. But everything that he's done, I say everything generalizing, but everything that he's done is done in such a way that it's self-serving and pride-driven and revolving around getting the woman that he wants. And when he doesn't get the woman he wants, he retaliates and is constantly in this cycle. But he was not given for that. He was given to be one who begins the process of deliverance. And as such, he was to be set apart. And as such, there were certain things he was not supposed to do. And he seemed to dwell on all of those things that he wasn't supposed to do and put emphasis on doing them. Chapter 16 with verse 4, and we'll spend the rest of our time in Judges here in chapter 16. And it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Everybody knows Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her and said unto her, entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will give thee, every one of us, 1,100 pieces of silver. And Delilah said to Samson, tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, and wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. Now why on earth he would give in to this? Well, he doesn't immediately, but he eventually does. Why on earth he doesn't see through what she's up to, but he doesn't. His weakness is women, and she has him wrapped around her finger. And she's trying to get to the bottom of the secret of his great strength. Well, jump ahead to verses 18 through 20. Finally, after a back and forth and several misses, he does tell her what the secret of his strength really is. Verse 18, and when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up this once, for he hath showed me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came up unto her, brought her the money in their hand, and she made him sleep upon her knees. And she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awoke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as other times. Notice that. Notice that Samson just assumes this will be like every other time. Not because he's confident in the Lord, but because over and over he has been able to use this God-given strength to his own advantages. By his own deviant plans, he uses it over and over. And he thinks, I'm just going to do all that again. And he wist not, the end of verse 20, that the Lord was departed from him. When you're walking with the Lord and you're used to fellowship with the Lord, when you're used to communing with him, you'd notice if the Lord departed. But when you're used to walking in the flesh, when you're used to just living life in the strength of your own ingenuity and ability, and the Lord's 1,000 miles from you and you don't even know it, and you don't notice it because you're not used to it. And he wasn't used to it. Now, he was a man given by God for a specific reason. And because of that, was called upon to be separate. And was called upon to not do some things. Don't touch a dead body, which he did. Don't have a razor to come to your head, which ended up, he revealed that secret, and that happened. The Philistines, now the Lord departed from him, he's got no strength. Verse 21, the Philistines took him, put out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza, and bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. So the Lord departs from him, and they literally pluck out his eyes, removing his ability to see. Bind him and put him in a grinding mill, like a mule, just grinding grain, pushing the contraption that would roll the wheel, that would grind the grain. Doesn't need to see anything anymore, just going around grinding the grain. How the strong have fallen. Verse 22 tells us, howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. God's not done with him yet, but Samson has to reach the bottom. Samson has to get to the end of himself. Verses 23 through 25, the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice, for they said, our God hath delivered Samson our enemy into our hand. Samson, they recognized, was their enemy. Samson, many times over the course of his life, had directed his great strength in opposition to the Philistines. Typically not because the Philistines were the mortal enemies of God. Typically not because he was trying to serve the Lord. Typically because they had done something that made him mad. And I'm going to get even. I'm going to retaliate. But they knew he was an enemy. And look what our God Dagon has given us the ability to do. Our God Dagon has delivered into our hands our enemy, Samson. And we've put out his eyes. And we bound him with brass fetters. And we put him in a mill, and he's grinding away. And he's no longer a threat to us. He's no longer able to harm us or our people or our crops. Samson is well under control. And when people saw him, they praised their God, verse 24, for they said, our God delivered into our hands our enemy and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. 1,000 in one day with the jawbone of a donkey, for example. When it came to pass, when their hearts were merry, that they said, call for Samson, that we may make us sport. We're going to make fun of him. We're going to ridicule him. We're going to laugh at him. We're going to say all manner of things and watch him grovel. Watch him be in despair. Weakness of this one very powerful man. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they sat him between the pillars. And Samson said unto the lad that held him by the hand, suffer me, that I may feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. We know what's going on here. We've been able to read this account and know what Samson has in his mind. Here he is, blind and weak and bound, being made fun of. And he says to the lad that leads him around, young man, I need to lean against a post. Take me to the posts of the house that bear it up. Show me where they are. I can't see. And the lad does that. Takes him to that bearing posts, those bearing posts of that place. Now the house, verse 27, was full of men and women. And all the lords of the Philistines were there. And there were upon the roof about 3,000 men and women that beheld while Samson made sport. So, throughout Samson's life, we haven't seen many victories that would be chalked up into the column of victories given by God. And here we certainly don't think we're going to see one. We who've read the thing know what's going to happen, but typically this does not look like it goes anywhere good for Samson. Haven't seen much in the way of conquering sin. Haven't seen much in the way of living a life that is separated. Haven't seen much in the way of doing that which was pleasing to the Lord and obedient unto God and loyal to Him. Haven't seen much of that sort of thing in Samson's life. But God has brought him to the end of himself. God has brought him to the place where that once the sight of a woman was all it took to rob him of his common sense. Now he doesn't have eyes. That once his strength was all he thought he needed to conquer any situation. Because I have strength. And now he doesn't have strength and he doesn't have eyes. And he's bound in this place. And he does something that's not recorded that he had done anywhere else. Verse 28. And Samson called unto the Lord. Samson's finally gotten to the place where you and I need to get. If you've never been there, I pray you get there. Where you call unto the Lord. Where you stop depending on your own strength. You stop being led of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and call upon the Lord for guidance and for strength and for victory. You don't see that in Samson's life, but you're going to see it in his death. And I know that he's calling upon the Lord in a contrite heart. I know that he's calling upon the Lord in a repentant heart. I know that he's calling upon the Lord in a faithful heart, because he's commended in Hebrews 11 that by faith he did this. Finally, not by his own strength. Finally, not by his own ability. Finally, not by his own ingenuity. It's all gone. And he's now, without eyes, ready to see God. In verse 28, he calls upon the Lord and said, "O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes." And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on which it was borne up, of the one with his right hand and of the other with his left. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords, and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew in his death were more than they which he slew in his life. He had a great victory. Samson received strength. Samson was able to do again the impossible, this time being led of the Lord, leaning on the Lord. Victory in him. Turn back with me to Hebrews 11. Hebrews, of course, chapter 11. We want to make some applications. We know that in spite of the vast majority of his life looking like it did, that when he got to the end of himself, when he called upon the Lord in faith, asking for strength, asking for victory, not necessarily first and foremost for his own selfish motives, but for the honor of God. Look what it says in verse 32 and 33 and 34. Hebrews 11:32, what shall I more say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, of Barak, and of Samson, of Jephthah, of David and Samuel, and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms. Samson was greatly used to begin the process of getting the Philistine chokehold off the Jewish people. Subdued kingdoms. Wrought righteousness. God's righteous judgment against the Philistines began to be measured, began to be exacted. They had taken his people and put them captive. And now a great blow was given to the Philistines. Notice what it says in verse 34. Out of weakness, right in the middle of the verse, out of weakness were made strong. I believe that has a very direct connection to Samson. In his strength, he never was strong. In his strength, he lived in the flesh. In his strength, he chased after women. In his strength, he did all of these things to satisfy his own urges. In his weakness, He did that which God called upon him to do. In his weakness, he was able to deal a tremendous blow to the Philistines. But not until he was in his weakness and he called upon God. Not until he stopped walking in the flesh. Not until he stopped living by the urges of the body and gave himself over to the will of God and called upon God. Obviously, there are several things we can make application in from our thoughts of Samson in the commendation that he has here in Hebrews 11. He was called for a purpose. He was given to his parents for a purpose, and they were told so, and what that purpose was. If you're here today and saved, you're saved for a purpose. And that purpose is to honor God and glorify God. That purpose, according to Romans chapter 6 and verse 18, is now to serve righteousness. Now that in Paul's argument in Romans chapter 6, he said, no longer a servant of sin, but a servant of righteousness. That's why you were saved. To be a servant of righteousness. To honor God with your life. To try to manifest before the people God. By the fruit of the flesh, demonstrating the characteristics of God. As one is having their lives and their testimonies rewritten by the Spirit of God taking up residence in their life and causing them to be a new creature in Christ Jesus. And if you're saved, that's why you're saved, to honor God with your life. And as such, like Samson, we're to be set apart. We're to live lives that are different than the world. It grieves me at my heart to see the trends of the world coming in to the people that say they're saved. The attitudes that are of the world that permeate our minds. The lifestyles many times. The apparel that we wear and don't wear. That mimics the world. And people don't see it. People don't, they just go along with the flow. And as long as we're a step or two behind the world, I'm pretty spiritual. But are we? Are we biblical? Right? That's more the question. Not am I a couple steps behind the world, but am I biblical? We're saved for a purpose and on purpose and for a purpose. That's to honor God with our lives. And as such, we need to live separated lives. Samson had some things he couldn't do that everybody else did. Right? He couldn't cut his hair. Pretty much everybody else got their hair cut when it needed to be cut. There's some things in your life and mine you can't do. An example that came to my mind as I was thinking about that, strictly speaking, probably one can make an argument that alcohol in moderation is not unscriptural. But I can't go out and go to a company Christmas party or whatever, and I can't... give me a martini. I don't even know. I've never had one, but wouldn't want one. Wouldn't take it if they offered it. Because it would be immediately, look what Pastor Graber. They wouldn't call me that at a company party except for if I did something like that. Then all of a sudden the pastor part would come out. Look what he's doing. He's drinking. And they would instinctively have a question mark right there, right now. I'm not talking about getting drunk. I'm not talking about doing it to excess, which is what the Bible obviously condemns. I'm just talking about what it looks like. And we're reminded in the Thessalonians not to even be in the area of what sin looks like. If it is of the appearance of evil, avoid it. And there were some things in Samson's life that he couldn't do because he was called of God, given by God, and sent on a very specific mission. There's things in your life and mine that we ought to recognize I can't do because it'll hinder my mission. My mission is to be a testimony. My mission is to honor God. There are some other lessons that we learn from Samson's life. Sin always weakens you. He was such a powerful man. He carries the gates of the city, posts and all, up into the hills. Oh, we're not going to stop him. He took the city gates. I think we'll leave him alone. He took a jawbone of a donkey and slew 1,000 men. I think you're good. Do what you want. We're going to let you alone. But his life was riddled with sin, following after the lust of the flesh. And he was so weak. In spirit, in constitution, in loyalty to the Lord, in obedience to the Lord, he was so weak. And sin will do that to you and me. Make you weak. And then fall at anything. Stumble over anything. You know what else sin will do in his life? Made him blind. It plucked out his eyes, and that was ultimately an end result of his giving himself over to the lust of the flesh and all of his womanizing that he did. And how that then he was betrayed by a woman that turned over his secret. Sin will make you blind. You won't see reality for what it is. You won't see danger for what it is. You won't see sin for what it is. You won't see God for who He is. If your life is riddled with sin. All of those things are true. What everybody goes to is, and it's a point to be made, that it's never too late as long as you're alive. Right? If you're alive, it's never too late. And that's true. Samson at the very, I probably said Solomon a dozen times, I don't know. Samson at the end of his life said, Lord, give me strength. Lad, show me where the posts are. And the Bible tells us that in that strength that God gave him, he slew more Philistines than he did in his life. It's never too late to repent. As long as there's life, there's opportunity to repent. Surrender your life and will to Him. That point can be made and is being made. And through faith, renewed strength given by God. And that's what is commended for in Hebrews chapter 11. And he finds victory, greater victory here over the Philistines than in any other place. And that's why he was given to begin that process of breaking the chokehold that the Philistines had. But think about something. I say it's never too late, and it's not, as long as there's life. But think about a couple things with me as it relates to Samson. Think about how much life Samson wasted. Think about how much opportunity Samson had and was wasted opportunities. And where you have wasted opportunity, you have regret. Think about the life of regret that as Samson is grinding grain with his eyes plucked out, think about the regret that had to be in Samson's heart. I was given so much. I was given a high calling. I was given great strength. There were so many things going my way, and I squandered it all. I let women run my heart. I let the lust of my flesh rule the day. And now here I am, broken and battered man. And think of the regret that living for the flesh must have left in Samson's heart. Now it is truly never too late, as long as there is life. But do you want the end of your life to be full of regret? Do you want the end of your life to be full of embarrassment and sorrow? Do you want the end of your life to wish back and think, oh, if I could have just done this different? I think Samson's life teaches us that. He had to have had regret. Think of the grief that he caused his parents. We got a glimpse of it when he told that he wanted to go after one of the daughters of Timnah. And the parents are like, dude, a Philistine woman, really? Come on. Think of the grief that his life caused his parents. Think of the embarrassment and dishonor that it caused God. Think of the wake of destruction that Samson left in so many areas in his orb, in his realm. So much of it the result of fleshly driven, sinful actions. Think of the missed opportunity. Samson had given himself to sin and the lust of the flesh when he had been given so many opportunities and so much potential. And the presence of the Lord being with him in such powerful ways. Squandered and missed so many opportunities to honor the Lord with his life. So there are so many things that we can learn from Samson. The deep and tremendous cost of sin. But that while there is life, there is hope. You can find victory in Jesus. If you're here today, you've not gone past the ability for Him to save you. You've not gone past the ability in your actions that He's no longer able to cleanse your life and make you whole. You may have some scars. You may have some reminders of your past life, but He can save you from your sin. He can give you victory in Jesus. Samson's victory at the end of his life was greater than all the other victories that he had in the flesh. Because by faith he looked to the Lord. By faith he was strengthened. Don't waste your life. Don't get old and think, why did I live like that? Trust Him today. Dedicate your life to Him today. Give your heart to Him today and yield to the Lord. and find victory in Jesus. Let's stand.